The house felt different the morning after the funeral. Not louder, not emptier, just unfamiliar somehow. The kind of silence that settles into the walls after too many people have gone home. Outside, the November air hung cold over the backyard, and a thin layer of frost clung to the wooden fence beside the maple tree. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower started for a few seconds, then stopped again. Everything else remained still. The woman inside the house stood barefoot in the kitchen, one hand wrapped around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She had not slept much. Grief has a way of changing the shape of time. Hours feel stretched. Small sounds suddenly feel enormous. Even the refrigerator humming in the corner can begin to feel unbearable at 4 in the morning. She moved slowly toward the sink and stared out through the window above it, not really looking at anything at all. And that was when she noticed the bird. A cardinal, bright red against the pale gray yard. It sat perfectly still on the fence post nearest the house, no more than 20 feet away. At first, it seemed ordinary. Cardinals were common this time of year. People all across America wake up to flashes of red moving through bare winter trees. But this one didn't move. It didn't peck at the ground. It didn't dart between branches the way cardinals usually do. It simply remained there, facing the window. Watching. The woman barely breathed. Outside, a faint wind stirred the dead leaves along the edge of the yard. But the bird held completely still, its small crest lifted gently against the cold morning air. Seconds passed, then another minute. And somehow, the longer it stayed there, the stranger the moment began to feel. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because the stories you're about to hear may quietly change the way you look at the birds outside your own window. And what happened next made this moment even harder to explain. The cardinal returned the following morning, at almost the exact same time. The next morning, the bird returned before sunrise. The sky outside still carried that dim blue color that comes just before daylight, when the world feels suspended between night and morning. Inside the house, the woman sat alone at the kitchen table wearing the same oversized gray sweater she had worn for nearly 3 days. The coffee maker clicked softly beside her, filling the quiet with small mechanical sounds that somehow made the emptiness feel even larger. And there it was again. The cardinal stood on the same fence post as before, its red feathers almost glowing against the cold November air. It did not flutter from branch to branch. It did not search the ground for seeds. It simply stayed there, calm and unmoving, as if it had nowhere else to be. And strangely, this is the part many people understand immediately, because grief changes the way ordinary things feel. A certain song on the radio suddenly sounds different. A familiar hallway feels unfamiliar at night. Even small moments begin carrying strange emotional weight. And for many people, it is often a bird that appears during those quiet spaces left behind after someone is gone. Not dramatically, not like something from a movie. Usually it happens in silence. A bird outside the bedroom window. A soft tapping sound near the porch. A flash of color in a backyard that suddenly feels too still. The woman tried to ignore it at first. She told herself it was only a coincidence. Just another winter bird stopping by the yard. But what unsettled her was not the bird itself. It was the feeling that came with it. The strange sense that the house no longer felt entirely empty when the cardinal was there. And over the next few days, something even more unusual began to happen. By the 4th morning, the woman stopped pretending the visits did not matter. She would wake before dawn now, long before the furnace clicked on, and stand quietly near the kitchen window waiting for the first pale light to touch the backyard fence. And almost every morning, the cardinal was already there. Sometimes it arrived while the yard was still dark. Sometimes a light snowfall covered the grass beneath it. But it always chose the same place, the same fence post closest to the house, as if some invisible line connected that spot to the quiet inside. Her kitchen. What made it unsettling was not only the repetition. It was the behavior. Cardinals are cautious birds by nature. They startle easily. A slammed car door or sudden movement usually sends them flying into nearby trees. But this one rarely reacted. Even when the woman stepped closer to the glass, the bird remained still, its black eyes fixed toward the window as though it was listening for something inside the house. Researchers who study bird behavior have long noticed how certain species become deeply familiar with human routines. Cardinals remember feeding locations. They recognize safe environments. Some can even distinguish individual human faces over time. But there are moments that seem to drift beyond ordinary explanation. Moments where an animal no longer feels like part of the background of life, but something observing it alongside you. And perhaps that is why experiences like this stay with people for years. Because deep down, most people sense there may be an unseen layer beneath ordinary life, hidden quietly beneath morning routines and backyard silence. A world where grief sharpens perception in ways people rarely talk about. And this is where the woman began noticing something even stranger. The Cardinal did not appear every morning. It only appeared on the days she missed him the most. At first, the woman tried to explain the pattern away. Winter birds often return to places where they feel safe. Cardinals especially are known for staying close to familiar territory instead of migrating long distances like other species. Some bird experts even believe cardinals can memorize feeding schedules and recognize repeated human movement around a home. So she told herself there was nothing unusual about any of this. The backyard was quiet. The fence offered shelter from the wind. Maybe the bird had simply claimed this corner of the neighborhood as part of its territory. But certain details continued to trouble her in ways logic could not fully settle. The Cardinal never appeared when guests visited the house. It never came during the noisy afternoons when delivery trucks rattled past the street. Instead, it arrived almost exclusively during the quietest hours of morning, when grief felt closest to the surface. Usually just before sunrise. Usually when the woman stood alone near the kitchen sink, holding her coffee with both hands, staring absently into the yard as though waiting for a memory to return. Scientists who study grief have observed something quietly fascinating about the human mind. After loss, people often become unusually aware of patterns and small emotional signals around them. The brain begins searching the world for connection, even in places it once ignored. But perhaps that is why moments like these feel so deeply personal. Because sometimes the natural world responds in ways that seem almost timed to human emotion. And whether that timing is coincidence, instinct, or something harder to explain, the feeling it leaves behind can become impossible to forget. Then one icy morning, the woman noticed something that made the entire experience feel different. The Cardinal was no longer waiting on the fence. It was standing directly outside the kitchen window. The glass had begun to fog lightly from the warmth inside the kitchen when the woman stepped closer to the window. Outside, the Cardinal stood only inches away now, perched on the narrow wooden rail beneath the frame. Its feathers looked impossibly vivid against the colorless morning, bright red beneath a sky still heavy with winter clouds. For a moment, neither of them moved. The woman could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock behind her and the soft hiss of the coffee maker finishing its cycle. But somehow the entire room felt quieter than before, as though the house itself had paused to notice the bird. Then the Cardinal tilted its head slightly. Such a small movement. Barely noticeable. But something about it felt familiar in a way she could not explain. The man she lost used to do the same thing while listening to her speak, especially during long quiet mornings exactly like this one. And that was the moment the visits stopped feeling random. Not because she believed the bird was someone returned to her. Deep down, she still did not know what she believed. But grief has a strange way of attaching emotion to details most people overlook. The angle of sunlight across a chair that no one sits in anymore. A jacket still hanging near the door weeks later. A familiar laugh you almost think you hear in another room. And now, somehow, this bird had become part of those quiet rituals of memory. Over the following days, the woman found herself leaving the kitchen curtains slightly open before bed each night. She began waking earlier just to sit near the window in the dark with her hands wrapped around a warm mug, waiting for the first flash of red to appear outside. And the strange part was not that the Cardinal kept returning. The strange part was how much comfort its presence slowly began to bring into a house that had felt unbearably empty only days before. Snow arrived quietly that week. Thin white layers gathered across the backyard overnight, softening the sharp edges of the fence and covering the dead grass beneath the maple tree. Every morning, the woman would wake before dawn and move through the dark house without turning on any lights, as though she did not want to disturb the silence that had settled there. And every morning, before the first pale streaks of sunlight touched the sky, the Cardinal appeared. Sometimes it waited near the kitchen window. Other times it perched on the porch railing only a few feet away, its feathers glowing against the frozen world around it like a small living ember. What began to unsettle her was not simply the bird returning. It was how deeply its presence seemed connected to certain moments. On the hardest mornings, the Cardinal arrived early and stayed longer. On the days she avoided looking at old photographs or tried distracting herself with errands and television noise, the bird never appeared at all. Then one evening, just after sunset, something happened she could not explain away so easily. The woman had been sitting alone in the living room holding an old flannel shirt that still carried the faint scent of cedar and cigarette smoke. Outside, the wind moved gently through the bare trees, making the branches tap softly against one another in the dark. And then, from somewhere beyond the window, came the sound of wings. She looked up. Instinctively, the Cardinal was perched outside the glass again. Even though it was nearly nightfall now, long past the hour birds usually settle into shelter. It remained there completely motionless, staring into the dim reflection of the room. And for the first time since the funeral, the woman felt something she had not allowed herself to feel before. Not peace exactly. Something stranger than that. The quiet feeling that perhaps grief was not always meant to be carried alone. But what happened the following morning would make the entire experience feel even more impossible to ignore. The following morning, the woman opened the kitchen curtain before the sun had fully risen. Outside, the world looked pale and motionless beneath the fresh snow, the trees standing dark against the dim winter sky. For a few seconds, she thought the Cardinal had not come. The fence sat empty. The porch railing was bare. But then she noticed a small trail of delicate footprints crossing the snow toward the window itself. Tiny marks pressed carefully into the white surface below the glass. The Cardinal was waiting there again, closer than ever before. It stood so near the house now that she could see the faint movement of its chest as it breathed in the cold air. And something about that moment felt deeply difficult to explain. Many people believe certain animals appear during periods of grief for reasons we do not fully understand. Not necessarily as supernatural signs, but as emotional companions woven quietly into moments of transition and loss. In some cultures, birds have long been connected to memory, to messages, or to the feeling that love somehow continues beyond physical absence. Whether those beliefs are spiritual or simply human attempts to make sense of grief, something about experiences like this continues to stay with people for years. Perhaps because they happen during moments when the world feels unusually thin, when silence feels heavier, when ordinary things begin carrying unexpected meaning. The woman still did not tell anyone about the Cardinal. She feared hearing herself describe it out loud might somehow break whatever fragile feeling had settled into the house. So instead, she kept watching. Morning after morning, snow drifting softly through the yard, the small red bird waiting near the glass. And slowly, without fully realizing it, she began speaking to it in the same quiet tone she once used with the man she lost. But one particular morning, the Cardinal did something it had never done before. The next morning arrived softer than the others. Snow drifted slowly through the air in thin, quiet spirals, and the entire neighborhood seemed wrapped in a kind of muted stillness that only comes during deep winter. The woman stood near the kitchen window with both hands around a warm mug, watching the pale lights spread gradually across the yard. And there, beneath the bare maple branches, the Cardinal waited again. But this time, instead of remaining near the glass, the bird moved slowly across the snow toward the old wooden bench at the far corner of the yard. The same bench where the man used to sit every Sunday morning with his coffee long before the illness, long before the hospital rooms and silence that followed. The woman felt her chest tighten gently as she watched the bird settle onto the snow-covered armrest. For a long moment, nothing happened. No dramatic sign. No impossible event. Just the faint sound of wind moving through frozen branches and the small red bird resting quietly where someone she loved used to be. And somehow, that simplicity made the moment feel even more profound. Many people describe grief as learning how to exist beside an absence that never fully leaves. But perhaps there are moments when the world around us softens that absence in small, unexpected ways. A familiar scent carried briefly through a hallway. A song arriving at the exact right time. A bird appearing in the middle of a silent winter morning exactly where memory still lives. The woman no longer tried to decide whether the cardinal meant something supernatural. That question had begun to matter less with each passing day. What mattered was the feeling itself, the strange calm that entered the house whenever the bird appeared, the sense that love, somehow, had not disappeared as completely as she once feared. And as the cardinal sat quietly on the old bench beneath the falling snow, the woman realized something she had not admitted to herself before. For the first time since losing him, she was no longer afraid of the silence. Weeks passed, and little by little, winter began loosening its grip on the neighborhood. The snow along the fence melted into thin streams of water that shimmered beneath the pale afternoon light, and the bare maple branches slowly carried the first signs of returning life. The woman still woke early each morning out of habit now, moving quietly through the kitchen while dawn settled softly across the yard. Sometimes the cardinal appeared. Sometimes it did not. But strangely, the absence no longer filled the house with the same unbearable emptiness it once had. Something inside her had changed during those silent winter mornings by the window. One morning near the beginning of spring, she opened the curtain and realized the bird was gone again. No red feathers near the porch railing. No small footprints crossing the damp grass below the window. Only the gentle sound of wind moving through the trees and the distant call of another bird somewhere farther down the street. The woman stood there for a long time holding her coffee, watching the sunlight slowly spread across the old wooden bench at the edge of the yard. And for the first time since the funeral, the silence no longer felt heavy. It simply felt quiet, peaceful in a way she had almost forgotten life could feel. She never told anyone exactly what happened that winter. Not because she feared they would not believe her, but because some experiences lose meaning when explained too directly. Perhaps the cardinal was only a bird returning to a familiar yard each morning. Perhaps grief simply made certain moments feel larger and more personal than they truly were. Or perhaps there are things in this world that move gently beside us during our hardest seasons, unnoticed by most people because they arrive so quietly. Many people who experience moments like this say the same thing afterward. The feeling stays with them long after the bird is gone, not as proof of anything supernatural, but as a reminder that love may leave traces behind in ways we do not fully understand. And maybe that is why stories like these continue to haunt people so deeply. Because somewhere between science and memory, between coincidence and meaning, there exists a space where the human heart still searches for connection. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If moments like these speak to something deep inside you, take a moment to subscribe before you leave, because there are still many quiet mysteries in this world most people pass by without ever truly seeing. And perhaps somewhere outside your own window tonight, beneath the sound of distant wind and rustling branches, something small and feathered is waiting silently in the dark. Maybe it is only a bird, but for some people, it never feels like only a bird.